So I left hospital after 6 weeks. So I had 10 days in intensive care, followed by 5 and a bit weeks on a trauma ward at the Royal London. And I couldn't actually go straight to the amputee rehab clinic because I had a fracture as well as an amputation, which is quite rare. So I had to go home and wait for my bones to heal before I could get a prosthetic leg. So I went home to my parents' house. I live in a flat in Stratford with my sister and another girl, but I obviously couldn't go back there because I needed to be looked after. So I went back to my parents' house in a wheelchair, which was, it was difficult because my house isn't really built for wheelchairs. Some of the doorways were too narrow to push the wheelchair through and things like that. So that came with its own challenges. I did have crutches too, so around the house I used crutches, but don't tell my physio because that's not really allowed. So I was in a wheelchair for 4 months and living with my parents, and I had this thing called an external fixator on my leg, fixing my bones. So lots of little metal pins going into my leg and holding my bones into position. So I had to have that removed after 4 months. So I went back in October, came out of hospital in July, went back in October, was readmitted to have that taken off, and then had a really horrible intermittent waiting period where I wasn't ill, however I had to stay in hospital because I had to be an inpatient in order to be transferred to the amputee rehab centre. So I had 10 days of just sitting around in bed watching Netflix, which was, probably not the best time of my life. Obviously going back into hospital did bring back a lot of memories, and where I thought that I'd got used to it and kind of got over the first hurdle of grief, I then relapsed slightly. I say slightly, there were a lot of tears during that time. And then after 10 days of being back at the Royal London, although the one good thing was it was really lovely to see all my nurse and surgeon friends again, but then after 10 days I got moved to an amputee rehab centre in Lambeth, which is a 12-bed unit specifically for amputee rehabilitation, and I was there for 6 weeks. And that came with its own challenges, being in a place where there are 12 wheelchairs at any given moment trying to go down the corridors and through. Some people can't steer quite as well as others. There were a few traffic jams. And it was a very surreal situation. The staff there again were fantastic. The physios in particular were absolutely amazing. We had intensive physio there twice a day. And then we had OT as well, occupational therapy. Where we had a breakfast club where we had to manoeuvre around the kitchen, firstly in our wheelchairs to cook breakfast, but then secondly when we got our prosthetic legs, we were like Bambi on ice, moving around the kitchen trying to make cups of tea and boil eggs and all sorts. So that was a really intensive period, but it was what got me on my feet, so to speak, quickly, because it was so full on that you came out. The idea was you left walking, and I did, I'm really pleased to say, walk out of those doors.